just going to, I didn't do a PowerPoint because I like to zoom and blow things up. So we're just gonna go from there. All right. And hopefully it will start. Here we go. Great. So I absolutely, everyone can see it? Yeah, thumbs up. You can see my screen? Great. I absolutely love hats. I'm really into Tetris. I love puzzles. And for me, a hat is a very public statement, but intensely personal. It's a piece of art. Oh, sorry, pause. It's a piece of art, but also it's self-expression. It's a political statement. It's a comfort. It's protection. It's luxury. It's all those things. So I love hats. I am by no means an expert. I'm a professional costume designer, and recently, as you can see by this photo, I started working at Global Effects, and every morning I get to walk past Gary Oldman's costume from Dracula. So this is where I go to get my tea, which is super fun. All right, let's go. I make hats in my spare time. This is me. That was one of the first hats I made. I also teach hat classes. And I just love to do research. I pattern a lot of hats from fashion plates. Here you see me hand drawing one. I hand draw all my patterns. I also do tutorial booklets. This is from one of my favorites, which is, this is what my work table usually looks like. And I love to just get up in there. This is another hat I've done. So I'm still learning, always learning, but I'm just fascinated by the 19th century. I recently did some hats for Sostine. Some of you may be familiar. There's a little fascinator I made spelling out her name. She has a lady doctor outfit that she is working on, and she commissioned me to make a hat for her. So this is the hat. Hopefully you will see it soon with her finished outfit. That's the back. Just for me, when I make my hats, I usually work in buckram and wire, and I like a really clean finish. My favorite go-to is late 1880s, which is what these particular hats are. These are based on fashion plates. They're completely hand-drawn from scratch. This was a hat from a client I made. All right, let me exit out of that and we'll get started. All right, so I have a lot of photos to show you. All right, so we're going to do a brief overview of the timeline. Most of you are probably already familiar, but just to do the broad strokes. So let's take a look at, let's break it down by era. So there's Georgian, which also encompasses Regency, the Romantic era. The Georgian era runs from about 1714 to 1830, 1837. I have some fashion plates. Just for me, I like to use fashion plates without heads in them so that everybody can envision themselves in them, regardless of who they are. It's actually, as a side note, it's really difficult to find fashion plates for people of color, which is also why I like to show just the object itself, because I think that's, you know, more inclusive. So I love Regency hats because they look like pieces of candy, little bonbons, little frillies, all kinds of things. They're just kind of ridiculous. They run the gamut from hats to turbans, all kinds of, like, I don't even know what this crazy thing is in the middle. It looks like something you put on a tea kettle. But I love it because it's just, nothing is too crazy. It's just adorable. It's very sweet and charming. This is a scene in a milliner's shop. So as you can see, she's presenting a sort of long bonnet here for purchase. He's scoping it out. It's just really fun of the era. And I have a couple reproduction ones we're going to look at just in a minute, because you see all these in the background, how they're hung up. They look a little fantastic, but the ones I've actually seen in real life are just as ridiculous. Like this one, I absolutely love. This looks like it has some padding in it, perhaps a little bit of caning, but I just love this craziness. It's like a bucket on her head. This is, I believe, what they call a capote, which is more of a soft bonnet. And I am a huge, for those of you who take my classes now, I'm a huge fan of hiding things in plain sight. So you can see here how the straw plate has created the structure with the fabric underneath. So they've incorporated the structure into this sort of soft bonnet design. And I love how it resembles a seashell. It's just so pretty. Here's some more crazy. I love this one. It looks like some kind of a weird ice cream bomb. It's delicious. Really cute. I just love this era because it's all pastels, really fun colors. You can experiment with straw, you know, silk, semi-transparent, huge brims, small brims, anything. It's just beautiful. It frames the face really nicely. All right, I think I am out of these. I'm actually going to switch to my webcam and show you a couple of bonnets right off the bat. So I also wanted to switch and show you this one right here. This is not necessarily a Regency, but it's one of my absolute favorites because hats tell a story and they're intensely personal. So this I found on eBay, and it's very simple, almost like a braid that's wound. It's very simple, very primitive. There's no lining on the inside. You can see it's all hand done. It's small. It's sort of a very generic poke bonnet shape. But when I bought it, there was a little piece of note paper inside, and I'm going to read it to you. It says, "Tan, my wedding bonnet in the good old days, ha ha. Lost one glove in a rainstorm coming home from," I can't quite read that. I think it's the name of the town, Brubaker. So it's her wedding bonnet, as you can see. And she wore this on the way home and tucked a little note into it. And when I got on eBay, the note came with, so she lost one glove on the way home. And I absolutely love that. I actually got this to wear to a Regency event. I just pinned some ribbons on it, but I left the note in it on purpose because I just love that. I think it should stay with the bonnet forever. All right, I apologize for the background. I literally have piles of hats to show you. Here's a reproduction Regency bonnet that I bought. So you can truly see how the shapes come to life. It is silk and velvet, and it's just beautiful. These little frilly bits, lots of pleating. It does have bonnet ties, and it's sort of an old throwback style. Let's see. There we go. Fully lined, beautiful. It's like candy. Sort of a little empire bonnet. And I'm also going to speak in a little bit about some children's books where you see these styles resurface again. This is what's called a conversation bonnet. This is also a reproduction. It was based on a fashion plate, and it's another crazy little shape right here. Little puff in the back, little brim, stripey, super fun. All right, we're going to switch back to the timeline, and I'm going to jump ahead to the next era. So the Regency and Romantic era kind of fall within Georgian, but I put them in their own section just because I wanted to pull out a couple of things. So the 1830s are not a particular favorite of mine, but they are very notable for bonnets, as you can see. They're just huge. They look like kind of an upside down bucket, a coal scuttle, and they balance out the fashion. So as the clothing got bigger, the skirts got bigger, the bonnets became bigger too. But they still frame the face beautifully, straw, velvet, all kinds of things. Bows just all over, big plumes. They balance out the skirt. So as the skirts got bigger, a small little hat wouldn't look right. So the brims got wider too. All right, let's skip ahead. So next is the Victorian era, which technically starts about 1836, 1837. Unfortunately, I do not have my spoon bonnets with me that I can show you, but I think most of us are familiar with the typical bonnet shape. So the 1850s bonnets tend to be a little rounder, have a lot of flowers framing the face. Sometimes they have little bunches on the inside. I just love this. A lot of them, the ribbons are called bonnet strings. They tend to be very wide, depending on the fashion. And some of them have alternative little utilitarian ties underneath to take the weight off of the ribbon, and the ribbon is just for show. This is an example of a caned bonnet, and I actually have an original I am going to show you, if I can figure out where it went. All right, I'm going to switch over to my camera and show you the original caned bonnet. Stop share. There we go. All right. So this is an antique. It is literally falling apart. It's very delicate. I found this on eBay. And it's literally one large rectangle that was sort of ruched and folded with tiny little casings for the cane. The cane is almost like a rattan. You can see here, it's very delicate. So sort of like it's almost like a wicker. And each of these little casings has a cane in it. The back is a light buckram, as you can see the inside. It's been molded. It's a little dented from being in storage, but it has a domed shape. And as you can see, the bonnet's rather sloped. It's not pretty much straight up and down. It has a tilt towards the back, and it would have been worn slightly tipping off the back of the head. This one has little tucks built in. It is entirely hand sewn. It is a beautiful charcoal color, and I love this because the bavalet, or little skirt, on the bottom actually has a wire in the bottom edge so you can shape it. and it has tucks as well, and it's been pleated beautifully, as you can see, into shape to kick out nicely at the back of the neck. And it's also called a curtain. And as you can see, it's fully lined with this beautiful mesh on the inside. This one's actually very nicely made. Even for having raw edges on the inside, you can see everything's finished. And the hand stitches are rather neat, and they're sort of hidden as well. There's nothing gaping out. So there's a little thin wire that runs in the bavalet, and it's all just kind of contained. There are bonnet strings. It looks like they've been cut off to perhaps be used for something else. And my other thing I love about this is it has little struts on the inside. You see these here? Right there? So they are, I can't tell if they're wires. I think they're actually wire, not pieces of cane. You can see one here. And it supports the hat because the hat is so light. It's actually self-covered with this charcoal iridescent silk. And then they put 1, 2, like little spokes, like a bicycle wheel, to support it around the face. It has a beautiful round shape. I'm thinking probably early to mid 1850s, as you can see. A lot of the lace is deteriorating and shattering, but it still has really beautiful color with all these little rows. I'm going to switch to my other camera and see if you can see some of the hand stitching. It's really super tiny. Let's see if you can get up in there and see. Able to see? Let's see if it'll focus. There you go. You can see some of the detail there. The tucks, the ruching, it's all hand sewn with the black lace overlay. And here's the back. The back has been molded. All right, and now I'm going to show you a reproduction version of a caned bonnet. So this is modern. Let me switch to my other camera. And it is a similar concept. So this is a modern version of a caned bonnet. You can really see the design here. So it's just basically sheared into shape. I think this is actually wires. They cheated a little, but it's very similar. They put the tuck in the front, similar construction. It's very lightweight, and you can see there's a lot of hand sewing on the inside to keep the tucks. It's just really beautiful. It's very simple, very sweet. Lovely shearing around the face. All right, let's go back to share screen. All right. So this is an original. This is a museum piece. Most of my photos come from the Met Museum. You can see this one has that same strut on the inside to keep it out. We're going to look at bonnet uglies in just a minute. Let's see. Is that it? Nope. Here we go, bonnet shapes. And we're also going to talk about the advent of hair. The influence of hair was really big in the 19th century. I'm sorry, these are so slow. My computer has had a long day. Here we go. We see that very sweet shape. It's tipped off the face, frames it beautifully. As it progressed, as the 1860s progressed, hair became more prevalent. And this is what's known as a fanchon bonnet. It became more triangular, and it allows for elaborate hairstyles in the back. We're going to look at hair in just a minute. So that is mid-century, and then we're going to go on to my favorite, late Victorian. Late Victorian is, I just love it. The hats became very, very tall as bustles became very, very big. And I'm going to show you a couple of summer hats. The taller, the better. And it literally was an explosion of ribbon loops. I also wanted to call your attention to hat pins. The 1880s had hat pins like I've never seen anything like before. These are hat pins at the bottom. They're almost fist size, and it's just a spike that you literally would stab through the back of your hat, which is kind of crazy. All right. Nope. Nope. Next photo. Here we go. There were lots of birds, lots of flowers, lots of loops, lots of everything all over the front of it. Asymmetry was big, lots of face framing styles, just like the sort of Regency. There was soft bonnets, toques, all kinds of different ones. All right, you, come on, here we go. And I actually want to show you this one because I have two extant hats I'm going to show you right now that are nearly identical. I love this cut in the back, again, to show a little bit of the nape of the neck, the hair with all the ribbon loops. And let me switch over to this one. This one is nearly identical. So this is 1880s. The straw plate is absolutely microscopic. I don't know how they sewed it together. It is so finely woven. You can see they have a little cut in the back, just like the other one. And the ribbon's coming apart a little bit here, which I actually like because then I can see how it's made. So you can see how the plates step down right about here, and then they finished the cut edge with a different width of plate. Then they covered it with the ribbon in the back. It's a beautiful shape, very flattering. There's a slight flare and a roll back around the face, and they put a sheared velvet facing on it that goes through to the inside. It's a wine color. I know it's hard to see on here. It peaks up in the front, then this is just about falling off, but it's literally 2 yards of ribbon that they wadded up into many, many loops and just kind of stuck it on the top. It's like, it actually closely resembles this. The more crumples, the better, the higher, the better. So there's a little ribbon on the side. Let me see if I can switch over to my other camera. Here we go. That's much better. Little ribbon on the side. You can see the beautiful burgundy color. And it's only partially lined, probably as a foundation for the back, just to make sure it didn't come apart. Again, the stitches are very rough, probably home trimmed. And I've seen a lot of bonnet blanks sold, so they would probably retrim this per season. There's a chapter in Little House, I believe it's when Laura Ingalls is courting, and before her wedding, it says she unpicks the hat, sponges and represses the velvet and puts it back on. So it always reminds me of something like this, where she might take it apart and redo it to freshen it up. I have another one that is nearly identical in terms, they're very similar. You can see the colors are almost the same. They're both straw, but they are completely different shapes. This one has a little bit of age, but this one has a rounded back, as you can see. The design is totally different. It begins in a round and a circle. It also has a little bit of step down, but then they just finished it. And any unpleasantness at the top, they literally just draped a bunch of velvet over it, smashed it down, stapled some flowers on it, and called it a day. But they spent a little more trouble on the lining, which was nice. A little facing on the bottom. Both of them have the beautiful bonnet strings. This one is actually satin ribbon, whereas the other one is velvet. And it looks like they cut this off probably to use it on a dress. So very similar. This might actually be a little earlier, a little more romantic, little probably early 1880s, maybe even late 1870s, but I think this one is 80s. This one is definitely 1880s. It has that peaked shape and it's beautiful. That straw braid is just absolutely tiny, as you can see. It's in very good condition. It's starting to go, but it's in very good condition. Just really beautiful. All right, let's go back to share screen. Okay, and then we go to, after that is 1890s, which gets really nuts. Oh, let me get out of here. Out of here, out of here. So here are the rest of the 1880s. The hats got a little smaller, then they went really tall to balance it out. This is actually very similar to the hats I just showed you. This is the 1870s. So the hats became sweeter, a lot more romantic with flowers. This is Trousseau. Trousseau actually has really excellent details. Okay. And then finally, the 1890s and Edwardian became really crazy with bows and loops and all kinds of everything. Tailoring and menswear was also very big. So you see a lot of boaters, a lot of skimmers, and it was actually the advent of sports. 1880 started with sports and tennis. This one just looks like a lampshade. 1890s, it's hard to tell what they are. 1890s, ridiculous plumes, and here is a boater. You start to see a lot of boaters or skimmers on women. All right, let's get into actual hats. So let's look at culture. So I wanted to show you this one. I'm focusing mostly on Western fashion, but it's really interesting to see other cultures display Western fashion through adopting them. This is a Hawaiian princess. Her name, oh, I'm going to murder her name, but it's Princess Kaiulani. She was born to a Hawaiian mother and Scottish father. She was educated abroad and was very stylish, very modern. She came home in her early 20s. Unfortunately, she died young, but I believe she signified sort of the advent of the new world, but she completely embraced Western fashion, and I just absolutely love her hats here. They're just beautiful. This is my favorite right there. But I love how you see the sort of embrace of the hat as a fashion statement in other cultures. This one I also absolutely love because some other cultures put their stamp on it. This is in Puerto Rico. It's the 1890s, mid 1890s. This was from an article I read called Fierce Fashion. And you can see the balloon sleeves, but she's done her own sort of hat with a little headscarf, and she's put her own spin on it. So I love it because it's very stylish, but very much her own design. I also love in Japan, the Meiji Era, which was 1868 to 1912. The Japanese government ended sakoku, which translates to roughly national isolation, in 1859, which opened up the ports to foreign countries and visitors. Politicians and diplomats began to incorporate Western style clothing into their wardrobe. Sometimes as a mashup, they would use Japanese kimono textiles for the Western styles. I love this because you see a lot of these and it incorporates both the absolute beauty of their art with the minimalism and just the gorgeous colors, but also these are very distinctly Western fashions, even marrying the very conservative hairstyles with these crazy 1880s hats. I love these. You also see some photos. They're not as easy to find, but you can definitely see how they fully embraced Western fashion here. I think I have a couple more. Here's another one. This one's a great hat. She just went for it. So this is probably mid 1880s, and she's got a beautiful sort of little flower pot hat on there. And you can see even her child has a hat as well in Western fashion. A lot of folk costume. I just wanted to contrast. Not everybody embraced Western fashion in this way. This is Breton, France in the 1880s, and you can see the marked difference. They did not embrace Western fashion in the same way, but they had very distinct hats that were made very distinct way. So not every culture embraced this sort of Western fashion. Hat is also policy and law, which there's a dark side, unfortunately, as well. Tignon law began in, I think, about 1786. It was called the Edict of Good Governance. Earlier in 1769, Louisiana law allowed enslaved people to buy their own freedom, which then allowed freed people social status and wealth, and they really came into their own. Unfortunately, the government was not having it, and the Edict of Good Governance, the Tignon law, decreed that by law, women of color had to cover their hair with a scarf or a handkerchief, and basically an attempt to limit and control them. The laws were also intended to prevent any mixed race women from passing as white because they had to clearly cover their hair. The women pushed back, making the Tignons a fashion statement, like this beautiful one. I love this. Fortunately, Louisiana stopped enforcing the laws in the early 1800s. Come on. I have a few original images that are just gorgeous of this. Come on. Here we go. Nope. Sorry, my computer is just having a moment. I have this one. This is earlier, probably circa early 1800s as well. She's tied it beautifully with a very gorgeous scarlet fabric. And I have one more to show you. This looks slightly later, maybe Romantic Era as well. There we go. I just love that. I love this. Just beautiful. All right, I'm going to drop a little link into the chat, which has a fantastic video with more information about that as well. There you go. All right. So next I want to show you working class women and their hats, because they had some fantastic ones. So unfortunately, not everybody could afford to be fancy, and also it was dependent upon where you lived. So many of us are familiar with the sunbonnet, Little House on the Prairie, frontier wear, working class. Obviously, you don't want to wear a very fancy ornate hat if you are out working in the field, if you're feeding your chickens. So this is actually a corded bonnet. There's also a slat bonnet, which had pasteboard put in, but this is cording to create the structure in the brim. But that doesn't mean you can't be fancy. There were beautiful versions as well. I believe this particular photo is from the Smithsonian. And I've never seen one like this with corded designs on the brim, which is really gorgeous. This is fantastic. I've seen one with very long curtains, very fancy ties. I think there's another one. This one's really fun. This looks like straw built in. And also there were many versions for working women. They had day caps, linen caps, tied them on with handkerchief. If you're working over a fire, you don't have time to be that fancy. So there were different versions. Also, depending on what your profession was, it would also dictate your hat. So these are actually, I believe, Welsh women who work, assist in the coal mines, but I love how fancy this is. I can't quite tell if this was a fancy hat at some time and it suffered a sad fate, or if it's some kind of folk decoration that they've decorated it with. I'm also going to show you the pit brow women, who are a particular favorite of mine. These are the pit brow lasses. They are Welsh, and they worked in the coal mines. They also have very significant shovel they usually carry with clogs. But as you can see, this was necessary for work. It was sort of their uniform, not necessarily a fashion statement. And again, with the folk costume, I find the Welsh had a lot of very strong statement hats. These women are Welsh with the tall crowns, and I see a lot of this sort of translating over into the 1880s with the tall hats. I believe they were influenced a little bit that way, but I just love this. It's so fun. I think I have one more. Here we go. This is great. So they would wear a little cap underneath with this beautiful hat. All right. So now let's look at millinery during the era. We'll look at some ads. So let me show you this super fun thing. This is the conformator. The 19th century was huge in terms of inventions, and everything was electrified and bananas. It was the age of innovation in terms of style and inventions. This is called the hat conformator. It's basically a sort of hat sizer for your head, but I just love how overly ridiculous they had to make it. You know, no measuring tape here. It has to have moving pieces and 8 million things. Oh, come on. All right. This is an example. I believe the salon might be Worth, but it's a very exclusive high-end salon, probably about 1912. This is also extremely indicative of client relations and consumer experience. You can see the chandelier. You can see all this open space. In a department store, this is not a good use of the space unless this is a luxury product, in which case it's all about the setting and the design. I just love this. This is massive right on her head. But you can see they're almost like lampshades. They're all arranged at eye level. There's a mirror to further exaggerate the effect. And you can see the marble. It's just very fancy, very fancy. And it's the experience. It's not just a hat, it's a luxury experience. There are many ads that I came across, print ads, almost catalog style. Advertising was sort of feeling its way as well, but you can see a lot of period catalogs are a really good way to find out not just hats, but hat trims. You could get a hat blank or buy one pre-trimmed. Come on. Here we go. I have a few photos of millinery shops, which are really great, not only for the hats in the window, but also for the women who worked there. This girl looks very young. You can see she's almost growing out of her clothes, probably a teenager. And this one looks more like caps. I can't quite tell if they're for children or some kind of ornate day cap. Almost looks like maybe a few pairs of shoes. Very simple. These are working class women. They're not necessarily poor, but this is sort of casual business attire. All right. I would guess this is mid 1880s. And I just love how the buildings are so tall with the awning. This I especially love because it's a service. Well, they will literally come to you and make a hat for you. They will travel to any part of the kingdom and make your hat and a veil. So I will touch on the many styles of hats in just a moment, but I absolutely love this because the advent of traveling businesses has kind of faded in terms of, you know, personal privacy and security and just people living more spread out and public transportation. So I'm actually happy people don't come to my house to make my hat, but I feel like something has been lost there. This is another millinery shop. You can almost make out the hats in the window. Almost. I believe this is mid to late 1890s. Probably looks a little bit later, but you can see that sort of really vertical style going up with the loops, the piles of daisies, the lace curtain in the background, the various lamps. It looks like they have another hat sort of suspended here. The window displays are a little bit fancier. The women don't look as fancy as the other ones. This one, she's got an apron on. They do not look that excited to have their picture taken. I think this might be a combo with a sewing machine shop as well. But this looks like a little bit later. Here we go. And I have some more print ads, hats and bonnets. A lot of them advertise, you know, spring collections coming out. Here's another one. This is the one that splits it with the sewing machine store. This also looks like mid 1880s. Here we go. We have them hanging in the window. Kind of looks like they just sort of jumbled them. These look like blanks, like you would trim them themselves. And it looks like they married it probably millinery. And this almost looks like a machine, probably a dressmaker right next door. Fancy Goods, Main Street, Falls, Connecticut. This is a picture by Degas. I found numerous depictions of millinery shops and milliners making hats by Degas, and they all seem to be the sort of oil crayon, you know, watercolor with Misty. And it shows them as sort of sad brown birds making the hats for more exclusive clients. But I like it because it really shows the guts. It shows her trimming it. She's got the pieces here of the plumes. She's putting it together. And it also shows how the hats were trimmed. This looks like a blank, and possibly decorating it per the customer's taste. I believe this is dated 1882. This is an actual milliner from 1850s, I believe. She's posed, showing the tools of her trade and her child. And this is actually a calling card, which we don't really have calling cards anymore with the, now we have Facebook pages, but I love, again, I always revert to Laura Ingalls and Little House on the Prairie. And if you've read those books, you know how important calling cards were in the day. But I love this, it's just beautiful. Come on, you. Oh, that might be it for millinery. All right, let's look at construction. So how were the hats made? I wanted to pull out a few things. If you've seen those crazy shaped bonnets, some of them are very three-dimensional and flared. And I have a strange fascination with these Chalkware molds because you could literally make the bonnet on the molds. A lot of them had wood right here at the tip. You can see the tracings for the different lines. So if you could either, you know, sort of sew it and then steam it to shape on the mold. A lot of them had, you know, holes, or soak them and let them dry in the mold. Or you could build it directly on the mold according to the lines. They're almost like pattern lines. And I love this. It's a different shape for the crown piece. You could adjust it but you can see that crazy flare in there, which otherwise would be a little tricky to replicate. I have another picture here of a bonnet actually on the mold, so you can see it. I think there's some pins in it. I had a photo of one with the wood. Here you go. So you can see the chunk of wood right here with the pins in it. So you can see how they built it with the different rows sort of colliding, and then they finish it off and shape it, which I absolutely love. Here's sort of a piece. So you can see kind of the before and the after of how it takes shape. Large open weave, which is just beautiful. This is what's known as a capote or a hood. And a lot of these were lace shawls that were pleated into shape. They were used as opera hoods. I see this a lot in the 1860s through sort of the 1880s, where you could, it was not cut, none of it was cut. There's this very complex pleating arrangement. So you could arrange your template upon this beautiful lace shawl and pleat it into shape. I've seen this for dolmens, for mantles, and also for opera hoods. I've seen this particular style numerous times. What else? Hats were built on sort of a light netting. They didn't use the traditional buckram that we have now. It was a much lighter version. They would also use wire frames. There are many millinery guides with wire frames. Per era, they were made differently. This looks like a toque from a little bit later. This is more Edwardian. I'm going to blow this up a little so you can see. So you create this beautiful skeleton. Part of it was for the weight, but also part of it was these extreme 3D shapes that would bend and warp in different ways, and you can shear the fabric right on top of it. The frame could also be super helpful for straw if you're building straw on it. I have a mid 1890s hat that's straw braid, but it has a wire running around the bottom of it because it has this extreme flare in the front. But you can see here they added the little bits about trim as well. You could also knit. I've seen variations. Some of them were knitted and they were purely fabric and flexible. Other ones were knitted either with wire and then shaped with wire or stiffened. This is from Godey's Ladies book. Some of the there were home millinery guides, but there were also chapters in Peterson's magazine and Ladies book about knitting your own hats. This is a winter hood. I'm going to show you the collage in just a second, but I actually have two winter hoods I can show you, one of which looks nearly identical to this. So this is a quilted silk hood. It is a seasonal item, and this is directions. They had a pattern in it. I think I have the pattern as well. So it's usually made of velvet lined with wool or wadding, which was almost like a felt. And here was the pattern they had. Come on. So very simple. The shape was drawn in either with shearing or ribbon. And I'm actually going to switch over right now and show you mine. I have two. Is this one? No, I'm going to switch over to the other one. Here we go. So the one that is most like the picture I just showed you is this one. It is made of velvet. It has a sheared skirt, and it's literally just a big half circle. Let me spread it out so you can see it here. It's sort of a big gathered half circle at the bottom. It's drawn in here. The face is folded back. It's sort of self-lined with the beautiful satin, has a bow on the top, and it's very simple. It has a tape holding all the gathers in. It's basically like a big half circle that's bag lined, and then they just drew it into shape and put a little bow. I've seen versions where they put wire in it to really frame the face. This one is not, excuse me, interlined. It's very thin, so maybe a fall version. The other one I have, that might be earlier. This one is definitely later. This is sort of a brown burgundy velvet, and it has this beautiful quilted lining in it, as you can see. So this is meant, I think it's wadding. Wadding was sort of a particulate. If you've ever used those padded envelopes with sort of that felty stuff inside, it's very similar to that. But you can see sort of the same. This one is pieced into 3, and then the skirt is actually a wedge that was shaped. But this one's very beautifully made. They covered all the seams. The ribbons are done nicely. All the stitching is hidden. You can see all that quilting. I believe it is machined, but it's done in this sort of crazy pattern, as you can see. And it's gotten a lot of wear. I can see it's shiny here from somebody's head wearing it. It's also small. I can tell it's from a later era, probably the 1880s, because the hairstyles tended to be smaller then, and you can see how close to the head it was. They put a bow here and also here in the back, and they have little ties. This one's a little looser. There are no ties. You just kind of throw it on. Next, I'm going to show you the collage. First, I wanted to show you the picture so you know what I'm talking about. And then I'm going to show you the original. A collage was 18th century, but the use of it extended into the early 19th century, I think as late as the 1830s, although the shape evolved slightly. It was typically made of silk, lined with like a stiffening, like an organdy. I almost always see it in pictures of it in green, because apparently green was considered a healthful color and the most flattering. It is very much like that caned bonnet I showed you. These are canes. And it's almost like an accordion. A lot of them had strings where you would have to hold the string. And there was a thing where flirting, you would snap your collage string to get the attention of somebody. But I just have a strange fascination with them. And I actually found an original on eBay, which I'm going to show you. It's very fragile and sort of falling apart. But again, the shape is very simple. It's basically a big rectangle that's sort of sheared into shape. You can see the cane. I'm going to pull it out. Hopefully it won't fall apart in my hands. So it is also green like the other one. It's extremely lightweight. This is a rectangle that has been sheared around, and they just put a little puff on it to cover that. You can see the cane in here, and there are sort of channels just like the other one. And as you can see, it's like a bellows. So there's hand sort of gathered between and also on. I'm not sure what happened around the face because that part is really falling apart. But I believe it's whipped gathers you can see on the inside, and you can see the organdy here to keep the shape. It's semi-transparent, so I can almost make out what's going underneath. This is a square piece. They didn't even cover a circle, and it's very janky. They just sort of tacked it in there. It does have a little bit of a curtain, which is lined in a polished cotton. I'm not sure the date of this one. It seems a little smaller, so it could be early 18th century. I mean, early 1800s extending. It's not as big as some of the later ones with the polished cotton. I honestly don't know enough to specifically date this, but the color is still pretty brilliant. It's faded, and I'm hoping to make a pattern off of it and make my own. It's kind of exciting to hold something in my hand that is that old. It has little strings. Again, I think only one has survived. The string is actually a ribbon. It's silk. It's very thin. It's a very lightweight ribbon. It has like a really fun little picot edge that's very small, if you can see. The color is pretty true. It's barely faded, but it looks like someone probably chopped it off to use it for something else. All right. So let me go back to share screen. So we talked about some construction, wire frames, all of these. Chalkware molds. Oh, I wanted to show you this. So I'm going to show you 2 original patterns. If you know me, you know I'm absolutely nuts for pattern diagrams. And this, in the handout, there's like a 4-page handout included with links. This is actually an original pattern diagram for an 1840s bonnet. I found it at the Hathy Trust, which is an archive site. And you can see this is part of a bonnet pattern right here. So this is something that people at home would get. It's from, I believe, a German sort of version of their version of Godey's, but it's poorly labeled. I think the corresponding piece, you would drape the back yourself. The tip, you would form that yourself. I think there's another piece of it in here somewhere. This is probably also an option for the back. You can see right here. So this is very early. They also, I went through the archives and they had ones up through the 1860s that were more shaped with various pieces. This looks like the flared brim right here, but I was still working on translating the German to find out which piece was which. And then I lucked out, and a few years ago on LiveJournal, somebody had posted this guide. It's an 1880s dressmaking guide. And while most of the diagrams in here are not correct, they had something I'd absolutely never seen before at the very end, which was hats. And I'd never seen 1880s hats like that. So again, most of them are not correct. And when I tried to make them up as is, they did not work. Here you go. But they gave me great ideas for adjusting them to actually make them work on my own. So it's sort of a little crash course in hat making, but they have some really great styles that I've seen. And they were a great basis for actually, I corrected a lot of the patterns and I made them to work. If you'll see this one right here, this was the basis for one of my patterns. And here are some of the other ones. So it was just really fun to see an original source for a lot of styles. This one right here is a very popular style, the clamshell. I tried their pattern, did not work, but I made my own and I'm going to show you right now my version of it. I see it all the time, and it's literally a clamshell. It folds flat. I've seen straw versions of it as well. There's another version which is covered. It's sort of like the Olivia bonnet, which I see that version as well, but it's literally 2 circles. But it's patterned a very specific way, because if you just try to do 2 circles, it doesn't fit on your head. There are actually a lot of darts and it's shaped in here. So another trick I'd like to do is, this is actually an evening gown from the thrift store I cut up. I used the beading and that was a little trick, but this is a very 1880s. I found it once in an original photo, I believe I have somewhere. All right, I'm gonna share screen again. So not only were hats a political statement, but apparently they were also self-defense. Let's go to, we're going to talk about the hat pin peril. So towards the end of the 19th century, apparently with the advent of public transportation and a lot of women being out and about, the hat pin peril arose, where a lot of women were basically being groped and assaulted, because once you get on a streetcar, it's sort of nose to nose, and if you can't see behind you, you know, you can be assaulted. So women were fighting back. Their hats were bigger, and so were their hat pins. Oh, come on. Here we go. There were a lot of court cases, and which they christened it the hat pin peril. A lot of women were standing up for themselves and independent, and a lot of laws began to be enacted regarding specifying the length of the hat pins. Here we go. Due to some of the less savory types using them as weapons against policemen, but a lot of the laws arose because they were afraid suffragettes would use them. But the hats were bigger, the hat pins were bigger, and there's actually a form of self-defense that arose from using the hat pins. I personally think it was kind of great because women didn't have a lot of options in those situations, but it was viewed as the hat pin as a complete menace. And I think the fury eventually died down in the early 1900s and everybody settled down. But I just love this, the hat pin peril. All right. Let's talk about plume hunting. So one of the things that was not so great about hats in the 19th century is they used a lot of feathers and plumes, like a lot. Millions and millions of birds were specifically killed for their feathers. I think snowy egrets are still on the endangered list. They've come back, but not quite the same. So it actually became so out of control that conservation laws finally started around the turn of the century, and sanctuaries were enacted. But if you love women's Edwardian hats, then you know there are birds all over everything. This is a snowy egret. It's still, you cannot get these feathers. I love this. This is a diagram for plumes, presumably for hat making. So I just wanted to, so it identified all the different ones. I have a feeling some of these birds are probably extinct at this point, probably because of charts like this. But plume hunting was a serious problem. I believe even Theodore Roosevelt became involved and signed a lot of, there were a lot of wildlife refuges and sanctuaries that happened because of it. There we go. This is just terrible. I think it's an entire chicken. I do love feathers. I do love birds. If you're going to use them, try to ethically source them. It's a beautiful look, but it has a terrible price. All right. I think we've done our millinery. Let's take a look at what's next. All right, let's look at some style highlights. I love the 18th century influence. 18th century influence was huge in the 1880s in art, especially. I love Trousseau because he tends to reuse the same hat over and over and over. So here's this hat. And here it is again. And here it is again. And again. Nope, that might be it. I think there was one more. This hat is based on a sort of shepherdess look, and it was part of a very popular movement called the Dolly Varden style, which was based on a character in a Charles Dickens novel, Barnaby Rudge. It was an 18th century character, and it's the whole shepherdess style comes up again and again during the 1880s. It started in the 1870s. I actually patterned a hat after it. We covered this briefly in my class. I also love it because a lot of the styles show quilted petticoats that are probably original. This is an early 1880s interpretation of it. Here is the Dolly Varden. There were songs. It was a hugely popular character for the common people. But I love this because it's clearly an 1870s interpretation, but they probably used original materials. That might even be an original hat. Who knows? So there were songs. There were clothes, and the Dolly Varden I see again and again referred even up through the 1910s. It referred to chintz fabrics, the style of the hat. You see it reflected here. The 18th century just kept going and going and going. So it affected the hats because the sort of tiny little tip and crown and the wide sort of shepherdess style I see again and again reflected in many, 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 many hats. This is earlier. This seems like almost 1860s, but I see it. And it's just a really flattering style. Here we go. It's also closely resembles the Pamela hat, which is a version of it, which is more of sort of like a little chip hat. Let's see, I think that's it for that one. Let's talk about Kate Marinoway. Kate Greenaway was a children's author. Her mother was a seamstress and a milliner, and she was very famous for doing these children's illustrations, which were heavily influenced by Regency and 18th century costume. And you can see a lot of it in the hats. Again, this is sort of reminiscent of that shepherdess style. This children's bonnet, I'm actually going to stop share screen because I have one that's almost identical to this. All right, so I bought this one on eBay. It's blue velvet. And it actually has cording in the back, if you can see that. I'm going to switch to my other camera so you can see it better. There we go. So it has cording and a perfect round in the back. I bought this thinking it was a women's bonnet from the 1880s and was kind of disappointed when I got it until I saw how beautiful it was. It's blue. And what I absolutely love is there's wire in the edge of the crown, and it's patterned in a sort of wedge so that when I bring it close to the face, it purposely ripples, which is really cute. But it's almost identical to that photo I just showed you. It actually was quite nicely taken care of for a children's bonnet. You can see the inside, it's fully lined. There's no padding in it. I don't know if this was ever worn. It still has a stamp in it. It says 91, if you can see that right there. It doesn't look like it's been worn, or if so, maybe just for a photo. It has a very small amount of wear. I don't have one that has padding in it, but I believe I've seen one that actually had padding in the top to protect the child. But that's really pretty. And I actually have another one, which reminded me of Kate Greenaway. This was another mystery buy on eBay. This one is machine stitched with a regular machine with a bobbin thread. This one is actually chain stitched. And this one was a mystery to me. I still can't quite figure it out, but I think it's a children's bonnet, but it's very meticulous. The ribbon is just beautiful. It's that two-tone. You can see it's got the puff. It actually really resembles one of the Regency bonnets, the pink one I showed you earlier. It has ruching. This one is also in excellent condition, but all of the, you can see here, the two right there. And it's fully lined. The lining is starting to shatter a little bit, but really nicely done. But I think this might be, I think this is wire in the two channels. But really interesting. This hat was sort of a mystery to me. I couldn't figure out if this was supposed to be an adult hat. I think it's, I finally decided it was a child's hat, even though it's quite fancy for a child's hat. All right, so let's go back to share screen. All right, so here's the bonnet. Here's some more, few more images of Kate Greenaway. She also heavily influenced adult fashion as well. You can see it reflected. Medieval influence and 18th century influence were huge in the 1880s. You can see the hats as well. This is Kate Greenaway herself. And again, you see the sort of resurgence of soft bonnets because of this movement. All right, let's see what's going on here. Oh, this I wanted to show you. Because of the bow style, it wasn't just the hat, but also specifically the bows on the hats. I was doing research for one of the patterns I made, and I found this crazy set of bow loops here, and I thought it was just really strange with this one until I found this, and it was specifically a type of 18th century, it was a fashion, so this specific bow was a particular fashion for a really brief period. I think it was 1898, it kind of came and went, but the same buckle, the same bows, heavily influenced by 18th century. And then it even influenced the illustrations. I thought this was kind of great. Even the cat has a bonnet on. I just love that. All right, so we're almost done with style highlights. Day versus evening. So there were all kinds of everything, hats for every occasion. I know we're running out of time, so I'm doing a quick run through of the rest of my hats. This is a ball headdress. Again, a headpiece very specific for evening wear. This is morning wear, a day cap. I have an evening version I'm going to show you right now. So it's sheer lace, as you can see, completely sheer. Two bows. I think this is a dinner bonnet, probably from 1860s. Let me switch over to my other camera. It's hard to tell because I haven't seen many, so I'm not really sure, but it's literally a piece of lace. There's a very thin netting frame on the inside here. It's very delicate, sort of falling apart, and it does have ties. I think it's probably late 1860s if I were to date it, but it doesn't look like it's for day wear. I believe it's a dinner bonnet. All right, share screen. So this was sort of the morning version of that, morning cap before you've done your hair. Fancy dress was huge, and this is absolutely ridiculous. When I was looking for bad hats, I found about 20 that were just, each one was larger than the last. This is a day cap, and this is the identical hat, but this is an evening version. So you can see it reflected in the beading and the different styles. A lot of people have seen this. This is Kitty Fearing. This is from a fancy dress, and that is an actual taxidermed cat on her head. Some people really went to extremes during the fancy dress ball. It was for one thrown by the Vanderbilts, and her outfit is actually made of cats as well, which is really terrible. But I believe she wanted to make a statement, and she definitely did. The hats are very simple. A lot of it is in the trim. This is a pattern I found online if you care to recreate it itself. And I want to talk about tremblants. I absolutely love these little quirks for tremblants. This is an example. This is from the Fashioning Fashion exhibit, and I loved it so much I decided to recreate it myself. So I did it with wire. Let's see, this one, here we go. I did it with wire and jet beading, as you can see. And the point of the tremblant was, it was typically for fancier hats or evening hats, and it was movement. That was a version 2. This is the version 1 I did. I did mine with wire. The one from Fashioning Fashion was done with thread, little bits of loose leather lozenges hanging from thread, but I made mine, and I love how they tremble when you move, and it's a beautiful effect made of jet beading. All right, let me share screen again. There we go. Here's an evening version. You can see just by the difference of choosing. That might be it for day versus evening. All right, let's look at some more style highlights. The influence of hair. So the hats got smaller as the hair got bigger. I believe the largest amount of false hair sold was in the 1870s, the early 1870s. As you showcase the hair, the hats basically shrank up and crawled on the head, or they became huge. This is Edwardian. The Edwardian hats just went higher and higher. You can see the Fanchon bonnet here. It began to shrink at the back of the head. I love this because it literally is almost leaping off the front of her head to make way for her hair. You can see the hairstyle here. The hat gets higher and higher, bigger and bigger. And here's a Fanchon bonnet. There we go, until it's literally just a disc on the top of your head. All right. Sports were hugely influential as well. A lot of sort of tailored styles happened. There's golf, riding, even in riding habits. Here's yachting, more riding. Even riding habits, the hats change significantly. It started with a bowler and it turned into a top hat. And I have one I'm actually going to show you. This is an original. It has a gorgeous quilted band. Ooh, let me switch over. Let me show you a couple more hats, and I'm going to do a quick tutorial for a couple of things. So you can see the gorgeous quilted band. And I love on the inside, if you can see, apparently it was a hatter for the queen. This one's in extremely good condition, probably because it's almost too small to wear. Beautiful, brushed, really nice. Really nice. All right. So I'm going to jump through a few more, then we will cut over to a quick tutorial. I'm going to turn my curling iron on so I can show you something. Hats were also intensely seasonal. I showed you the winter hoods, but I really wanted to show you this because you almost never see this. It's called an ugly. And it literally was their version of sort of a sunshade on the front of their bonnet. It was a caned piece that was added onto the front of your bonnet in the mid-century, and it was roundly hated but very effective. It was sort of like the version of the baseball cap. This one I found on an auction site, and I was very surprised because I've seen them mentioned, but I almost never see them in actual examples. These are wadded bonnets or pumpkin bonnets, padded bonnets. They're sort of a version of the winter hood. They're quilted basically to keep you warm in the winter. All right, celebrity influence. I'm going to blaze through this in the Dolly Trousseau and show you a couple hats and then a tutorial with like one or two things. Celebrity influence was big. There was military influence in the hats. Queen Victoria released her Highland journals, and immediately Scottish fashion was a huge thing. There were a lot of Glengarry caps, as you can see here. This is super small, but you can see here, same thing, her little cap version. Here again. And it lasted. This is Lily Langtry. I'm reading her autobiography, and supposedly she just draped this velvet toque on her own in 5 minutes, which I think is a complete lie. But after she surfaced in this picture with a feather stuck in it, the toque was all the rage for a short period. Sarah Bernhardt started a play called Princess Fedora, and sort of alpine and Tyrolean hats at that time were also on the rise, and after that, the fedora hat went nuts. You see it start in the 1880s. It became a women's hat. And then this is also the advent of other royal influence. This is a Mousquetaire 1850s hat. You can see it on the children. Also the sort of Highland journals, you can see the Scottish, but I see this style a lot. It's reminiscent of musketeers. Here we go. Here's Princess Fedora. Her hat is decidedly not a felt fedora, but I believe she wore one in the play. And also this one was extremely influential. All right. So what I like to do when I am researching hats is one of my favorite things to do is look at Dolly Trousseau catalogs, which seems very strange, but the dolls were basically fashion plates of their day. Some of them were not really meant to be played with. They were more a status symbol. And there's actually a couple books. There's one called Blondinette d'Avranches you can get on Amazon. This is from there. And it's basically the doll has an outfit for every occasion. A lot of times they were made by exclusive dressmakers. So the hats, not only do they have the clothes and the tiny doll corsets, they also have insane hats. This one is my favorite, the Blondinette d'Avranches. You can get this book. And unfortunately, the collection was auctioned off piecemeal. But as you can see, all the crazy hats, they're a great snapshot of what was really fashionable in their day. I think they have all kinds of hats going on here. So there are many doll trousseaus. It's just a fun little pastime to check it out. All right. I think that sort of caps it off. I might have a couple more hats to show you. Let me stop share while I set up for a couple of things to show you really quickly. Thank you for bearing with me. I'm sorry, today's been a very long day, but I'm going to do a little demo. Does anyone have any questions while I'm setting up to show you a couple of things?
Yeah, we did have a couple questions in
great.
the chat.
Yeah.
So some fun ones. First, going back to boater hats, they're hard made, the materials are harder and usually tightly woven. Do you think women used hat pins with them anyway, and would that have damaged the material?
That's a really great question. I have so many hats here. The bowler hats were also known as coke hats, and apparently it was the mark of a good hat if you could stand on it and not have it be damaged. I do not know enough as to whether there was some kind of hat pin involved or there's some kind of inner. I imagine it was something with the hair and they did fasten it on. As to whether it was for riding, if it was ties or an actual hat pin, I'm not sure. So unfortunately, I do not have a definitive answer for that one. But I've also seen, I'm trying to find this one hat I have where it actually has hat pin marks in it, and some of them look like punched holes, in which case I could see something like that happening for that hat to, oh, here it is. So here's one I have. I use this for a class. It's 1898, and it has numerous holes in it. Some of them look poked. Let me find one. And some of them, here, can you see this one right here? You see my finger poking right here, right here? This one looks like a round circular hole that's been punched. So I would not be surprised if they did something like that for a bowler that was that stiff. The top hats, I would expect to be some kind of elastic or a string, because it would basically ruin it to get a hat pin through it.
Right. So Aja was actually asking about boater.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said
okay.
bowler.
No, it's okay.
Boaters, I think I have seen originals. The women's boaters have the crowns are notably higher than men's. They're smaller and sort of taller. I don't know that I can recall seeing a hat pin in a bowler. I think maybe a string, but I think some of them were also just wedged on the head because the crowns tended to be small. Yeah, I did not recall seeing any hat pin holes in the original period boaters. They are stiff. They are also pretty stiff, but I believe you just kind of wedged it on your head. Just stuck it on there and hoped that you didn't get a stiff wind.
All righty. We had one other question about handling hats. Is it safe to handle these kinds of hats knowing some of the dyes of that era are dangerous? Like
yes and no. I mean, I'm handling them with my bare hands because I literally am always covered with dirt and whatever. A lot of them were treated with mercury and arsenic. It depends on what kind of hat as well. A lot of the dyes were probably not great, but I think as long as it's minimal, or, there are specific fabrics that were dyed. I don't handle these hats very often, so I think the exposure for me is minimal, but it doesn't hurt to be careful. Cotton gloves, especially when you're handling extant stuff. A lot of mine are like virtually falling apart, which is why I'm not as careful with them as I should be. Like this one I wanted to show you that has the wireframe on the inside. And I actually do buy pieces that are almost falling apart because then I can see how they're made. But if I do often wash my hands after I handle these, like after this, I'm going to go wash my hands, because first of all, you get the dust, but also I can feel things flaking off of my hand, and I definitely don't want to put that on my face or near my mouth. So I wouldn't, some things are heavy in arsenic, maybe some felts I think were treated with mercury and arsenic, but I think for the average hat, antique hat handling, if you just do it for a short period, it should be okay.
Yes, correct. And from a museum perspective too, when we handle hats in a museum, we typically wear nitrile gloves, but Chantal's right that, very short exposure is not going to harm you, and you should absolutely always wash your hands before and after.
Yeah. So feel free to continue asking questions while I show you a couple of little quickie things. I know some people are, it's probably a real grab bag in the audience as to people who are reenactors or make their own hats, and then ones that are just interested. So I'm just going to show you a couple of tricks sort of that anyone can reproduce if you are interested in trying it. So one of the ones, I love those bow loops. And also thank you for staying late with me. I'm sorry that I ran a little bit long, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys had all your info. So this is a bow loop. And I love those crazy bow loops, and they are incredibly structured. You can use ribbon. There was special ribbon. I actually have a piece of ribbon that's like 3 feet wide, specifically for hats, but you can make your own ribbon out of fabric. I love using candy striped. This is sort of like a silk taffeta, very light. So don't feel like if you can't find a ribbon, you know, that doesn't match, you can literally fake a ribbon on your own. So this is just a cut piece of heavy buckram. You can also use like crinoline netting. I like to use this because it's very structured. So I basically cut it to the shape of my loop that I want to make. You can also put this on the bias, which is really great because then you get crazy diagonal striping and it drapes really beautifully. So what you want to do, you would obviously hand sew this nicely, not what I am doing, but I'm just going to pin this. So you're going to sort of put that inside. You have to be careful with glue. I like to use Fabri-Tac because it's a dry glue. I don't like using Elmer's because it's a wet glue and it distorts the buckram and it creates problems and it makes your fabric soggy. So I've basically covered this. The buckram is like loose inside. And then I like to pinch pleat it. So I'm going to put a little pinch pleat here. You know, it's just like when you're making a gift bow, you create the loops individually and make the bow that way. You're not even really tying it. So I've done a sort of pinch pleat here, as you can see. And this is it's sort of an organic thing. I like to do things on the fly. So I'm putting another pinch pleat in it here. You can do it to taste. You can make it as high as you want. I like to build them individually and then stack them, sort of stagger them. So here you go. Look at that. So if you're building like an 1890s straw hat with like a bird coming out of the top and a big bow on the front, like here's half of it already, and you can see the beautiful structure. I also like it because it will permanently stay. I do not like using ribbon with a wire edge because it crumples so easily and it's so thin. This has structure. As you can see, the inside is covered, so it looks like a ribbon, but it's actually fabric. And you can see it will never come apart. So this is really fun. I've done different lengths. I've built up bows. You can also do it with actual ribbon where you marry the two ribbons together and you put the buckram inside. You can also use nylon horsehair is another good one. I'm going to show you, this is actually from the dollar store, but I love this because it is quintessentially a Victorian bow. It is actually 2 bows back to back. So here's one upside down. Can you see that? Here's one upside down, and here's the other one upside down. I have an original hat that has these upside down bows stacked on each other, and these tails stick up. So you can't even really tell they're bows. It just looks beautiful. You get this beautiful shape. So this is really excellent for mid to late 1890s. And I also love this because it's almost like a cockade style. It's really pretty, but it is literally one bow upside down and another one right side up. And you can stack them, you know, you can trace them and have the one stacking up. One of my tricks, which I'm going to share with you, I have not told anybody else, so I'm giving away all my secrets, is I like to use materials that are thrift store. I cut up beaded dresses. I cut up all kinds of stuff. This is completely garbage fake velour, right? You can even see how shiny it is. But I have something I call the squint test, where you do it in low light and you squint and you see if it's going to pass. Extremely thin. I mean, it's like nylon backing. It's terrible, but it's all about the look. This has potential. It's an aqua color. You can see it still has a nice sheen. I've found that if you take fabrics like this, or even stretch velvet, you know, sort of velvets that aren't that great, they look synthetic, and you turn them so the nap, the plush, goes sideways, not up, that eats the light, and then down is usually the way it's supposed to be worn, and it's the shiniest. It looks very modern and terrible. If you do it so the pile goes sideways, it looks like an antique hat, which let me see if I can get it. Usually when I do hats, it has to be on the bias anyway, so you have to fiddle with the grain lines a little, but if you were doing, here we go. So you can see when it's sideways, you get a really rich look out of a super cheap fabric. So that is one of my best tricks, where you take absolutely garbage fabrics, and if you change how the light falls on them, sometimes you can get just enough of that beautiful sheen. and you can see right there. So you still get the sheen, but you get the rich folds, and it looks period. So that's one of my tricks. Another trick is painting. So that Lily Langtry toque I showed you, I actually want to reproduce it. I'm working on a tutorial for it this weekend. And I didn't want to do a regular feather, so I literally took 2 black feathers I got from the dollar store and spray painted them outside. They're gold. I used, I think, Rust-Oleum Gold Metallic, which is my favorite gold. It looks like gold leaf no matter what you spray it on. So I did literally just spray this front and back. If you are going to spray straw, you can. You can also dye straw. You can throw it in the bathtub with RIT dye and it will dye. You have to, I would recommend looking up some tutorials first. You can also dye your feathers with Kool-Aid or RIT dye. That's also very fun. There's a lot of, in your handout, I think I put some stuff in there. I sent you a link to the Lynn McMaster's page, and she has tutorials for days about feathers, especially this one. This is an original piece, and it is ostrich, and it came off an original straw hat, and it's literally just a loose piece. But the reason the feathers from the past were so luxurious and full is because it's not just one feather, it's like 5 layered on top of each other. Let me see if you can see the stitches. Ooh. I'm going to switch over to my hotspot really quickly because I think my Wi-Fi is janky, so please bear with me while I switch over, just in case you're getting a little bit of lag. All right, 2 seconds. These are ostrich. All right, how's that? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So these are actually like 6 feathers stacked onto each other with little basting stitches all around. So what looks like 8 feathers is probably about 20 here, and they're all piled on, and you get this gorgeous, very luxe period look. This is also a good trick. This is great because you can wrap this around your neck, throw it on a hat. It's a great, really quick trim to have. I'm going to show you one more demo. So one of my favorites is, I did not make this up myself. I can't take credit for it. I think I learned it on the Lynn McMaster's site, is you can curl your feathers using a curling iron, which is really great when you're correcting the shape or you actually want to create a shape. So you literally just put your curling iron on and you can sort of walk it to create the curve. As you can see, the curve is forming right there. So if I want a sort of small one, or and surprisingly, it does not catch on fire, which I thought it would, but it actually takes the heat extremely well. Look at that. So this works really well with sort of feathers on a quill like this. This is just a pheasant feather, but I can continue to work this all the way down. You can get very extreme curls like this, or like sometimes you get a feather and it's perfect, but it's just bending the wrong way. You can also use different barrels of curling irons. I have really big ones. I have very small ones that I bought at the thrift store specifically just for feathers. I'm doing sort of a hatchet job on it right now, so they're a little crumply, but you get a great, you can see the curling, you get a great 3D look, and you can smooth it. Look at that. Beautiful. Really fun. That's a really fun, quick one. So you can really manipulate your feathers. If you have a rotary cutter, you can lay this on a mat, and you can create a template from a cardboard if you want to do little shapes, and you put your cardboard on it and use your rotary cutter to cut out the feather, and it'll be in little shapes. But this is a super fun one. I use this a lot too, and I do a spray of them, and they're all directional. And I think that's it. I have many more things I could show you, but I've already gone over